Hello, I'm Michael Martirone, social studies teacher at the Egg Harbor Township High School in Egg Harbor Township, New Jersey. And today I'm going to show you how my students and I use primary sources and historical documents in order to drive our instruction and to create a long-lasting understanding of historical events and their implications on our world today. Join me. So one of the first things I'll have my students do is interpret historical events and documents. And a great example of this is in 2016, I had my AP Government class watch the presidential debates. We watched it together with parents and friends alike, and we got an unobstructed view of the candidates and their positions. And this was important because it allowed the students to see firsthand just what the candidates said and where they stood on the issues without having it filtered through media sources and secondary sources. Again, this became a great primary source activity as the students were able to engage with each other, their parents, and me, the teacher. Students enjoyed the activity so much, I continued the tradition of watching States of the Union and other key moments in American political history so that my students could see firsthand what's happening and develop their own opinions and interpret the information for themselves. Another one of my favorite projects to do with my AP Government students involving primary sources and artifacts is to have the students compare presidential oratory with presidential greatness. This is a fun project that involves the parents of the students. Each student picks a president, and throughout the year, they research the president's speeches and statements and compare that with their legislative and foreign policy achievements throughout the year. At the end of the year, the parents and the students come in and they present their findings to the class. And this is a great way for students to evaluate the president and also to have a political conversation with their parents and evaluate presidents in a much broader context than they ordinarily would have. Another way that I challenge my students to interpret historical documents and artifacts is through a project that we do at the end of the year called the Freshman Art Gallery, or Art Through the Ages. And the idea with this is the freshman teachers have collected 150 paintings from the 1400s all the way up to modern day. The idea here is for students to move through the art gallery, look at various pieces of artwork, come up with their interpretations, their initial reactions, and then be able to try and piece together how that art fits into the broader picture of history and how that art is reflective of the times that people lived in. For example, a painting in the 1400s may be a little bit more dramatic and deal with religious upheaval or perhaps the trade and expansion of European powers, whereas paintings in the early 20th century may be more indicative of a world in crisis. So it's fun having the students compare and contrast different art movements to prove how that art is reflective of the times. After interpreting the documents and primary sources, the next phase of my teaching involves analysis. And what better way for students to analyze primary sources and documents than on a field trip? And one of the partnerships I'm most proud of is one we formed with the Philadelphia Historical Society right here in Philadelphia, where my students were able to get an up-close view of American historical documents. They have the largest collection of James Wilson documents, including a rough draft of the Constitution. Nothing blew my American history and my AP Government students away than looking at an early draft of the Constitution, seeing the preamble not say "we the people," but "we," and it listed the individual states. The students were blown away by how much changed between the early drafts and the final drafts. In addition to those documents, we saw other elements of the Declaration of Independence. We saw early census from Philadelphia, and we even saw and read a first-hand account of the death of George Washington as written by someone who was there. Again, those are things that are great to do in a classroom if you can get an excerpt printed out, but it's another thing for the students to physically be in the presence of the first-hand documents when they were created. One of the greatest lessons I feel I teach as an educator is a lesson on the Kennedy assassination. This lesson involves every aspect of a child's education. It involves science, it involves math, it involves English, it involves historical thinking skills, it involves analysis, it involves interpretation, and ultimately students will have to provide an argument as to who killed President Kennedy. Every student loves a crime story. Every student loves an American drama, and the Kennedy assassination is that drama. Before coming to my class, the students read an excerpt from Lady Bird Johnson's diary in their English class, and that offers a little bit of context and background for the students. And then in my class, we put the pieces together. The first stop the students will make is to examine what happened in the president's car. So they'll read witness statements from Mrs. Kennedy, Governor Connally, and various Secret Service agents. And that will be the basis for their investigation. From there, they will take a look at another station that's set up called the Texas Book Depository. Again, they will corroborate what happened with witness statements and photographs from the Texas School Book Depository. After that, students can take a look at the medical evidence, taking a look at the president's autopsy report as well as the clothing to see if that matches up with what witnesses originally said. Next, students will have to go to the ballistics table, where they will have to analyze the trajectory of the single bullet theory and determine whether or not a bullet fired from the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository at 88 yards away could have hit a moving target. Most American history curriculums treat the Kennedy assassination as an American tragedy, which it is, but it's also a powerful teaching tool for teachers to harness the power of historical documents and empirical evidence, to have students draw conclusions, form their own opinions, debate ideas. All of these are bedrock principles that should be embedded in an American history classroom. Once my students have interpreted evidence, once my students have analyzed the evidence, now is time for students' favorite activity, and that is to argue, to debate the evidence. Before I jump into any debate, the students have to get pretty comfortable with building an argument and articulating that point of view. An effective strategy for doing that is something called a chalk talk. You can do a chalk talk with any sort of primary source or document. I have chalk talked with medieval philosophies, I have chalk talked with foundational documents, I have chalk talked with various civil rights documents from the 1950s and 60s. What this assignment does is it requires the students to silently participate by commenting, questioning, or debating an argument on the board. Students have to remain silent throughout the activity, and they can post comments, questions, or statements on the board in rebuttal to a colleague's statement. And when your chalk talk is over, this is what your board should look like. It should be an interesting web of comments and questions posed by students to students, and the students have a genuine dialogue on the board. This is a great activity for students who may be just a little bit intimidated to get up and speak in front of a class. This is a great skill for them to practice before moving on to the debate itself. There are a variety of ways to which I allow students to develop their analysis skills, one of which is through the means of debate. Students love to argue, especially teenagers. So one of the earliest assignments or lessons I will do in my class is I'll debate the age-old question, was Greek truly democratic? Students are taught at an early age that the earliest form of democracy was found in Athens, Greece. But upon the evidence, students will review statements from Socrates and Pericles, Aristotle, Plato, and they will examine whether or not Greece was truly democratic in their ideals. And it's not just enough for students to make their own point. They have to successfully rebut their opponent's argument. And in order to do that, they need to successfully command their knowledge of primary source documents and historical documents and putting all of that evidence into a broader context. This is a great activity I love to do with my classes early on in the school year and really sets up the framework for how a debate should be conducted and is a great tool to building that learning community in the classroom. As the year continues, students' historical thinking and historical reading skills continue to improve and develop. So does the level of debate. But before we move into an all-out debate, we have to continue the structured conversation. In this instance, my AP government classes and my American history classes debate issues of the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, ratification of the Constitution, and issues involving slavery and states' rights. We have what's called a line debate because the students are forced to face one another and in a very rapid succession debate ideas as quickly as they can. This allows the students to stay focused on the important issues of the documents themselves rather than to go astray on different tangents. At the end of the year, once the students have mastered interpreting documents and once students have mastered analyzing documents, now is the time for students to build their arguments and execute them. And we start slow. In the advent of new technology, one of the first things we will do is to have students break ideas down using hashtags. This is a simple way for students to convey the main ideas of their different primary sources and documents, and it's a good way for them to begin to organize their thoughts. Once they've collected their thoughts, now's the time to build strategy. And again, they can use any primary source they want. In the past, we've had debates over the ideal form of government. We've had debates over the issue of slavery. We've had debates whether or not the country should be divided into smaller and larger states. We've also had debates over the best economic system for the people. The most impactful part of this project is that students can use any and all documents from their study of world history, American history, and American government and politics. We've had students use Thomas Hobbes and John Locke's writings to prove an ideal form of government. We've had students use the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and Frederick Douglass's works to prove equality. We've had students use the Constitution and the works from Seneca Falls and the suffrage movement, including Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, to prove gender equality. No document is off the table, and students who use the documents correctly and successfully can best prove their point during the main debate. This is the culminating activity of the school year. This is academic excellence. Students putting themselves first, working together as a team to articulate an argument. And what's real special about this debate as a teacher is that this is one day out of the year where former students come back, former teachers come back, and parents come in to watch their students debate in front of a class. As a teacher and a lifelong advocate of civics education, nothing is more profound than this activity. Having students, parents, family, friends come together using historical documents to articulate a point and to build an argument. Skills like these will leave the students in a better position to become better, more informed citizens in the years ahead.